Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're taking a deep dive into Galileo's dialogue concerning the two chief world systems.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
It is.
This book is from 1632, and it's basically this showdown between like the traditional Earth-centered view of the universe and this kind of radical new idea that maybe we orbit the sun.
Right, and what I think is so fascinating about it is, it's not just like a straight scientific treatise.
No.
It's written, it's a dialogue.
Yeah, as like a conversation.
Exactly, between three characters.
Yeah, it's Salviati, who is basically Galileo's stand-in.
Right.
You've got Sagredo, who's this like intelligent layman who's kind of open to new ideas. And then you have Simplicio, who is very much holding on to the old Aristotelian and Ptolemaic viewpoints.
So it's really like we're eavesdropping on a debate about the biggest scientific question of their time.
Absolutely. I mean, they are hashing out the nature of motion, the composition of the heavens, whether the Earth moves, if the universe even has a center at all.
Right. It's amazing.
I mean, they are tackling some huge themes.
Yeah, and what I love about it is Galileo does it in such an engaging way. Like, he uses analogies and thought experiments in his observations. So it's not just like reading, a dry scientific paper.
No, not at all. I mean, it's actually really fun to read. It's lively. He's a great writer.
Yeah, so before we jump into the specifics of the dialogue, I think it's important to kind of set the stage a little bit.
Yeah.
Talk about the historical context. Because Galileo was writing this at a time when the church was incredibly powerful.
Right, yeah. This is the 17th century.
Yeah.
And the church is really the dominant force.
And they very much supported the
Ptolemaic view.
Ptolemaic.
The Earth-centered universe.
Right.
And to question that,
Yeah.
to even suggest that maybe things were different, was considered heresy.
So Galileo was taking a huge risk by even writing this.
Huge risk.
Let alone publishing it.
I mean, he was putting himself in a very dangerous position, but
he was really convinced by this Copernican model,
which put the sun at the center and had the Earth and other planets revolving around it. And he wanted to present the arguments for it, even knowing the potential consequences.
That took some serious guts.
Yeah, he was definitely a brave man.
So let's talk about the dialogue itself. How does Galileo actually structure this debate, this conversation?
Well, so the book is divided into 4 days.
Okay.
And each day they tackle different aspects of this debate over these two world systems. So on day 1, they really dive into the nature of the universe, like what is it actually made of?
Okay.
And one of the first things Galileo challenges is this really fundamental Aristotelian concept, that there's this absolute division between like celestial matter and terrestrial matter.
Okay, so the heavens versus the earth.
Right, exactly. So like Aristotle and his followers believed that the heavens were perfect and unchanging. Everything's made of this like special fifth element. Whereas the earth is corrupt and changeable.
Right. So there was this big distinction between the two.
A huge distinction.
And Galileo starts to kind of poke holes in that.
Yeah, he's not buying it.
Right.
So one of the key pieces of evidence he uses is sunspots.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So Galileo, through his telescope, had observed these dark spots on the sun. And he argued that these were imperfections right on the surface of the sun itself.
So that right there is contradicting this idea.
This perfect, unchanging heavens. And of course, Simplicio is like, no way, this can't be right. He tries to explain them away. He says, oh, maybe they're illusions, or maybe they're like these little objects floating near the sun, but not on it.
Right, trying to preserve this traditional view.
Exactly.
But Salviati,
who again is speaking for Galileo, just dismantles those arguments.
Right, yeah.
He shows how they're just not consistent with the observations.
Yeah, because Galileo's actually looking through a telescope.
Yeah, he's got the data.
And he's seen what's actually happening.
Exactly.
So it's not just the sunspots.
Yeah.
He uses other observations to kind of drive his point home.
Yeah, he talks about the moon. And, he observes the moon through his telescope. And he sees mountains and valleys on the lunar surface.
So not a perfect sphere.
No, not at all. It's got this rough, imperfect surface, just like the Earth.
So he's really challenging this traditional view.
Big time.
Right at the beginning.
I mean, he's coming out swinging.
Yeah, setting the stage for, I imagine, an even more contentious debate as we go through the rest of the book.
Oh, you have no idea. Just wait till we get to the Earth's motion.
I'm ready for it.
And that's just day 1. I mean, day 2 is where things really get interesting.
Okay, bring it on.
This is where they start talking about the Earth's motion.
Which I imagine was very controversial.
Oh, yeah, incredibly controversial.
So how does Galileo even begin to approach this?
Well, he does it very strategically. He starts by addressing some of the most common arguments against the Earth moving.
Like what kind of arguments?
Well, one of the big ones was this idea that if the Earth were rotating, then objects would be flung off.
Because of centrifugal force.
Exactly. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Right. If you're spinning really fast, things are going to fly off.
Right.
But Galileo debunks this using a combination of like logic and geometry. He kind of breaks down the concept of motion into simpler parts. And he uses this example of like a ball rolling down an inclined plane to basically show that the force of gravity is what keeps everything grounded, even on a spinning Earth.
So he's using kind of everyday examples to illustrate these really complex ideas.
Exactly.
And I think that's part of what makes the dialogue so compelling.
Yeah, he's a master of analogy.
So, okay, he's addressed this idea of centrifugal force. What about this other common objection? That if the Earth is moving, we should feel it.
Oh, yes, that's where the famous ship analogy comes in.
Oh, right, I've heard of this one.
Okay, so picture this. You're on a ship, sailing smoothly across the sea.
Okay.
And you drop something, say a ball, from the top of the mast.
Sure.
Where does it land?
Well, I would imagine it lands at the foot of the mast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether the ship is moving or not.
Right, because everything on the ship is moving together.
Precisely. It's all relative.
Okay.
So Galileo uses this to show that objects on a rotating Earth would behave the same way. Even though the Earth is in motion, they would appear to fall straight down, just like on that moving ship.
So basically, we don't feel the Earth moving.
Yeah.
Because we're moving right along with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about frames of reference.
It's such a simple analogy.
Yeah.
But it's so effective.
It really is. And it's something we can all relate to. I mean, think about when you're on a plane or a train.
You don't feel like you're moving that fast.
No. You can toss a ball up and down. It's like you're standing still,
Right.
even though you're hurtling through space.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So Galileo is really laying the groundwork here for understanding relative motion.
Okay. So we've talked about centrifugal force. We've talked about this feeling of not sensing the Earth's movement. What other arguments did he address?
Well, one of the biggest ones had to do with stellar parallax.
Stellar parallax.
Yeah.
Remember what that is again?
Okay, so imagine you're looking at a star, and the Earth is orbiting the sun, right? So over the course of a year, the Earth is in different positions in its orbit.
Right.
Now, if the Earth is moving, then the apparent position of that star should shift slightly against the background of more distant stars.
Yeah, I'm kind of following you.
It's like if you hold your finger out in front of your face and close one eye then the other, your finger seems to jump back and forth.
Right, relative to the background.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's stellar parallax.
Yes.
And the problem was, astronomers at the time couldn't observe this shift.
Right, they couldn't detect any stellar parallax.
So they use that as evidence against the Earth moving.
Exactly. I mean, if the Earth is stationary, then there would be no parallax.
Makes sense.
But Galileo had a response to this.
Of course he did.
He said, well, maybe the stars are just so incredibly far away
Okay.
that the parallax is too small to measure.
So he wasn't saying that parallax didn't exist.
No, he was just saying it was too small to detect with the instruments they had at the time.
So, in a way, he was actually arguing for a much larger universe
Precise.
than anyone had imagined before.
Yeah, he's saying if the stars are that far away, then the universe must be absolutely immense.
Wow.
And this was a pretty radical idea.
Yeah,
It really challenged people's understanding of the scale of the cosmos.
And probably our place in it.
Absolutely. It's like suddenly the Earth isn't the center of everything anymore. It's just this tiny little speck.
Yeah.
In this vast and possibly infinite universe.
That's incredible.
It's mind-blowing.
And I'm guessing this is where day 3 picks up.
You got it. Day 3 is all about the philosophical and theological implications of this vast Copernican universe.
I can't wait to hear about it.
Yeah, so day 3 gets really philosophical. They start grappling with this idea of a universe that's vastly larger than anyone had previously imagined.
I can only imagine the kinds of questions that raised.
Oh yeah, they get into some deep stuff, like what does it mean for humanity if the Earth isn't the center of creation? And is a universe this big even compatible with the idea of a God who cares about us?
Those are some heavy questions.
Yeah, they really wrestle with the implications of this new worldview. And of course, Simplicio is still clinging to the old ways.
I bet he had a field day with this one.
Oh, he did. He argued that this whole idea of a vast universe was just wasteful and pointless. Why would God create all this space if it wasn't for our benefit? It just didn't make sense to him.
So how did Galileo respond to that?
Well, Salviati, speaking for Galileo, basically says that we can't presume to understand the full scope of God's creation. He argues that we're limited by our Earth-centered perspective and that judging the universe based on our own biases is kind of arrogant.
I like that.
It's a reminder that our understanding of the universe is always evolving, and we need to be open to new ideas, even if they challenge our preconceived notions.
Definitely.
And that brings us to day 4.
Okay, what happens on day 4?
Well, this is where Galileo tackles the tides.
The tides.
Yeah, he believed that the tides were evidence of the Earth's combined motions, of rotating on its axis and revolving around the sun.
Oh, but that's not quite right.
No, you're right. His theory of the tides was actually flawed. I mean, it couldn't fully account for the complex patterns of the tides that we observe.
But it was still a pretty bold attempt to explain them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was trying to find a physical explanation that fit within his model of a moving Earth, which was incredibly radical for the time.
Right. So even though he got the specifics wrong,
Yeah.
I guess his approach was still important.
Oh, definitely. It shows his commitment to finding evidence-based explanations, even if he didn't always hit the mark.
And it paved the way for future scientists to refine his ideas.
Exactly. And on day 4, he also talks about the idea of a magnetic Earth.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he was really inspired by the work of William Gilbert.
Who was that?
He was this English scientist who did a lot of research on magnetism back in the early 1600s. And Galileo believed that the Earth itself acted like a giant magnet, which he thought could help explain why objects stay on the Earth's surface as it rotates.
So he's connecting these different phenomena.
Yeah, he's trying to find a unified explanation for how the universe works.
I love that about Galileo.
Me too. He was always looking for connections and trying to understand the bigger picture.
And even though not all of his ideas were right,
Yeah.
his way of thinking
Was incredibly important for the advancement of science.
absolutely. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. It's been fascinating to delve into Galileo's dialogue.
Yeah, it's such a rich and thought-provoking book.
And it really makes you appreciate the power of observation and the importance of questioning established ideas.
Couldn't agree more.
So for all you listeners out there, if you're curious about the history of science, or if you just want to have your mind blown, I highly recommend checking out Galileo's dialogue.
Yeah, it's definitely worth a read.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep exploring and keep asking questions.